Right now, millions are building the Internet of Value. But the best version of this inevitable future isn't possible unless the data that fuels it can be exchanged securely and with confidence. This is a critical moment in defining our shared future. That's why nChain offers the tools to protect the data we'll need to build that future. The Internet of Value works because we do. Join us in securing the tomorrow we all share. nChain. Data without question.
Thank you and welcome. So I'm going to talk about some of the peer-to-peer aspects of Bitcoin and other such systems. He said they're different. I'll just say the ticker symbol's irrelevant. I'll be sorting that out with a whole lot of legal cases later this year. What people call Bitcoin isn't Bitcoin. It's nothing like my white paper if you actually read it. So anyway, to get on to properly going into this, Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer system. Now that doesn't mean that you have a network in the middle that you send things to that bounce around for a while, that it gets to the other person. Peer-to-peer means Alice and Bob, when they're communicating, send directly to each other. IP to IP, no middlemen. If you're doing something where you're sending to another node and it goes through a mesh, that's not peer-to-peer. There never was. So if you read textbooks from the 90s, the noughties, suddenly all this has changed. We have this new idea, peer-to-peer is where we have a mesh of networks. How the hell does sending through multiple hops of servers represent peer-to-peer? So that's an error that people have. So my concept at the beginning goes back, right back to the 90s, because the killer app that everyone talked about was micropayments. Why? Because then you can incentivize the internet without advertising. Without advertising, you have a competitive framework where any entry, any new player can come in and start competing. Rather than Google or Facebook or Twitter controlling the market, suddenly they have to compete. Right now, 80% of advertising, the lifeblood of the internet, is controlled by Silicon Valley companies. And you cannot get in. If you want to be a new player, Google will crush you. Simple. It's very simple. Google will just go to their advertising people and say, no. The end. So, simplified payment verification is how Bitcoin should have worked. The original implementation that I released in 2009 is very different to what you see now. The methodology that people stopped deploying was basically a person directly communicated with the IP address of another person. By doing that, that's how you have peer-to-peer. That allows you to scale very, very quickly and very easily. So this allows you to do an exchange not by having exchanges like Coinbase, but between people, to pay for small micropayments, small casual relationships between different machines, different entities, different applications. And with IoT devices, this is going to become more and more important. How do we actually buy where they're going to get access? How do we do it in a way that the machine itself doesn't need to run the application, but can still verify that someone has paid for it, that the access is there? So connectivity, as I've been saying, it's the direct exchange between users. So we need to go back to the functionality we can achieve with IPv6, what people have forgotten about because of NAT. The foundation of why the internet was there, the ability to talk between users directly. Bitcoin streamlines this. So you have this idea that, oh, but there'll be man-in-the-middle attacks. There won't. There's a simple answer. If you have keys, then you can trust both ends. Whether that's a non-authenticated, non-encrypted session, you still have authentication. So an authentication channel between Alice and Bob means that a man-in-the-middle attack won't work. If you don't want someone to see it, encrypt it. But if you don't care, if it's public, then they can't change it. And that's one of the key aspects of all of this. So this enables the production of new levels of efficiency, because when you can directly communicate, you can have content-aware networking, you can actually scale things out, fragment and store parts of the network all over the place. Rather than having large central servers, Facebook, Google, Amazon, of course, now you can actually have everything stored in a distributed manner, the way that the internet was originally promised to be. Very different model. It allows you to fragment and store things using all of the tools that are out there, plus many more. So identity can also be determined without leaking identity. Some of the things I've been talking about for years now include the ability with things like ECDSA to make hierarchical key structures. Using ECDH, Diffie-Hellman, you can then have additive values between things and provably have both parties know what the other party is, but generate new keys every time. Very simple, very easy, and very quick to actually start doing additional communications in a way that is secure. So this is one where records can either be permanent or not. So my concept here was looking at Bitcoin as a base layer. It's the payment system for the internet, not in the amounts people talk about now, but in hundredths of a cent. Now, on top of that, with micro channels, with payment channels, with other things like this, you can actually start doing billions of communication streams, many, many packets that are opened up over time, and all of these can basically be done at that fraction of a cent. So you could have an IoT device, for instance, that pays for access at 1,000th of a cent a time, and for that 1,000th of a cent, it can do 4 billion transactions. Now, that will be cheaper than any ISP is going to do, but if you build infrastructure, it then allows you to start prioritizing the different areas of traffic. Voice can go before something that doesn't matter. Other things can be queued for sending. So we can do that based on who wants to pay the most, which services are most, which things are tagged better. And in building this, we can also then isolate parts of the network as we need to. By isolating each of these parts of the network, of course, enables the sort of scalability, because unlike these other models like Ethereum where everyone has to try and run everything, why? Do you really want to run CryptoKitties on every machine you have? I mean, to be honest, that is an asinine approach. What you should be doing is having paid nodes decide what runs where. So if you want to have 100 nodes for resilience, fine, but that's it. You don't need to have everything happen. And on top of that, it's no more or less secure because you know the state at the end of every transaction stream. And on top of that, if you're recording that and want to rerun it, the results must come the same. So who cares? If someone wants to validate, they can. They can't change the results and they can audit the results. The whole world doesn't need to run everything possible. So in doing this, of course, what we end up with is the main nodes of the Bitcoin network are not all the nodes. BTC, for instance, has 15 nodes, of which 3 control 51%. Ethereum has 7 nodes, of 2 control 51%. And they're the big 2 that people talk about. That's all their decentralization. Nodes are defined in my white paper. They create blocks. All these other things that people call nodes are not nodes. It's very simple. They do nothing. The network is a small world network. It's near complete. All of the average, I've modeled this before, and every single miner has connections to every other miner plus every other node. So it's very quick. So thus, what you have is a distance between any user of the network goes first to a miner, then everywhere else. So this concept that there are meshes out there where it goes through multiple layers is just false. It's a propagated idea to say that the government can't shut us down. Pure and simple. Has nothing to do with anything to do with Bitcoin. So I had this argument even before, back in 2008 with James Donald, who went on, oh, we need thousands of nodes because big bad government will get us. Too bad, don't care, was never my intention. Bitcoin's not designed that way, blockchains aren't. What it is designed is so that this index in the middle that is paid, that holds an index of everything, can now form different layers on top of it. So you can have a context-aware network built on an indexed function. All of this scales incredibly well. So if you start thinking about it for a moment, you have a key value database that can be indexed directly on the hashes. It's fairly much random because of the double hash structure. That allows you to have a 256-bit index structure of all the UTXOs, other structures, and the way that SPV works isn't that you send to a block and ask for things. Rather, it is that you and the other person exchange information. So think about how you might scale if I'm sending to the blockchain, so to speak, the nodes, and then someone has to find that transaction. If you have billions of transactions, that very quickly becomes an empty hard problem and it doesn't scale at all. If you have to start searching through blocks to try and find where a transaction was from someone that you don't necessarily know all the details of, terrible model. The original way that Bitcoin worked with IP to IP was that I would directly hand you a communication and you would register on the blockchain. Who is the most interested person in any exchange where they're getting paid? The person giving the money or the person receiving it? Exactly. The person receiving the money cares more. The person sending it can go, well, I sent it, I don't care. The person receiving it, on the other hand, is going to make sure that that gets to a node, that it gets indexed, and that it is there so that double spends don't occur. So what we want to do is really set up direct communications and then index that communication. That allows us to have complex scripts that can be simplified for the miner, because we have conditional statements. We can go if A or B, and if A can be like an else type statement where I have all of the data, and B can be or a hash of the data. And I can give you the entire information, including the file. You can then hash that data, put that in the script, and the miner doesn't care that the communication is only partial, and they can actually say, oh, I've got the hash of the data, it's signed, everything's good. So you can actually have a large transaction involving an exchange to a person that is now stored on the blockchain as a small transaction. Much simpler model. So SPV clients act as an edge to this network. So it's a distributed edge network. So the manner of how you should be setting this up is any devices that are exchanging this information, and this can be built in with IPv6. This is where the other research I've been doing has involved. That can involve the allocation of IP addressing through CGA. That can be private because of CGA, enabling all of the sort of requirements under sort of European privacy rules, etc., while simultaneously having access controls and protection. It can be integrated with IPsec. IPsec can give you complex firewalls, access rules, etc., and that can all be sold by configuring information in script. So someone can actually go to an ISP or their company or anything else and say, this is the communication channel I want to buy. This is the one that I want to use as an access token, because access tokens are another access use for this. So rather than buying it, I can actually have something given by my company, NFTs, except instead of Bored Apes, I could have an authentication token to my company that gives me firewall rules. Those firewall rules set up my VPN, completely automated. IPsec, direct tunnel, no NAT to worry about, end-to-end encryption, and only the protocols, only the servers, only the access that I'm required to get to or allowed to get to. Personally, I think that's a better application than Bored Apes, but I'm selling to a whole lot of people who think they'll get rich because they have an ape. So we need to scale large volumes of data. Now, payment channels allow us to do that, summarizing information. Now, if we have machines talking, we don't need to put all of that to the blockchain. The concept on a payment channel with sequence numbers allows us to communicate back and forth between machines and update information over time, and then at the end of the communication, settle that. Each update can be signed and digitally recorded, which means that we have an immutable trail still. We have all of the records of all the changes, but we don't need to have it stored every nanosecond or so. The machines themselves can talk, can communicate, and only the important summarized information gets exchanged and saved. This is a key aspect of how Bitcoin should be working. It is a key aspect because it is peer-to-peer. Peer-to-peer you have to think, when I wrote this, it was written in 2008, the definition of peer-to-peer has shifted. It's very much like an Orwellian system where things change meaning. But that shift is important. In 2008, peer-to-peer was direct communications, Alice to Bob, no intermediaries. That's what it means. So if we want to build an internet system with no issues, then what we need to do is start the communication without that intermediary. So that exchange now needs to be done. So the exchange should be directly between the parties. The keyed information will be signed, meaning that there's not going to be any person in the middle who can actually view, change, alter any of this. No man-in-the-middle attacks. We don't need TLS, we don't need SSL. This can be directly integrated, whether we're doing it with IPsec in IPv6 or even in the communication streams through Bitcoin and other such things themselves. So using this combination of protocols allows us to actually build a form of identity that is safe. So the example here is, once again, going back to money. Alice wants to send Bob a check. Imagine the signed transaction to be a check, a negotiable instrument. In effect, it's a digital version thereof. Bob now receives that. Bob wants to make sure that he registered that, because a check is also an instrument that can be double spent. There are these things for people who are old like we are, that aren't 20-year-olds who remember what a check is. And in the past, check fraud was a thing because people had checks. And you could go and you could basically write 2 checks, and whoever got in there first might get the money. Well, the same thing was designed with Bitcoin. And the first person now has a network that is always available. And that is the whole purpose. And you can poll that network to check for double spends. So you know how quickly it's been there. You know whether someone immediately has done a double spend within seconds. Looking at peer-to-peer exchange, what we now have is the ability not only to write the information at the end, but to encapsulate all the exchange. So when I'm going to someone, I can go, "Hi, can I have an invoice for this?" The person can say, "Oh, give me the purchase order." They can exchange all of that. That can all be recorded. Now, because of the ability to hash documents, each party can save that and put the hash alone in the transaction. There's no GDPR issue because it's only the hash of the information. The file itself stays with the parties. It can be encrypted on a DLT. It can be encrypted on a DHT. It can be encrypted in other areas, but each party maintains their own information. They exchange that directly. Then the payment happens. After all of this occurs, then once the full exchange has happened, all the information gets recorded, but the world doesn't need to know. The world doesn't need to verify. No one gets to know your name. But equally, if you're buying something, you want to know who you bought it from. You want to be able to go and get a receipt and use it for tax purposes or claim when something's faulty. That enables us to actually scale. The only way that you scale a blockchain is very simple, peer-to-peer. Instead of sending everything to a bunch of nodes, you index things on a bunch of nodes. Those nodes are paid for an indexing service. They're not paid to verify everything. Here's a little secret. The hashing function is the security measure, not because of the mining, not because of the hash power, but because it's widely disseminated. If you think about it, every transaction in a Bitcoin or other system is not encrypted, it's hashed. That hash and the digital signature, etc., is basically put into a binary tree structure that is just hashes. It rolls up into a single hash on the block header. Now, if you think about it for a moment, the hash of the block header, if it's not secure, then neither is the whole block. Because that hash of the entire block contains all of the information that will ever be in that block, and if one single bit is ever changed, the whole block will be invalidated. So it's very simple. The world do not need to ever have an entire block. They need to have their path. They need to have the transaction they have. Because do you care about everyone else here in the room and their purchases of coffee today? Anyone care to check what everyone else did for coffee? No? Hotel expenses? Do you want to go and verify them all and check them? No? That's how things work in the real world. You check the person you're getting money from, is it valid? Yes. No. That's it. You record yours. So peer-to-peer scales only because everyone does their own thing, because they're peers. So transactions get verified in BTC by this central model. There are 3 machines controlling 51% of the network. That's it. You can say lots of miners, there's not. There are 3 pools. Those machines can't scale. Why? Because if they're taking everyone's transactions, verifying them, indexing them, saving them, disseminating them, and then Bob has to search through that, that's why you can't scale it. It's a very simple, different model. If you put everything in that model, then it's never going to be the case that Bob will easily find that information, because the larger the blocks get, the harder it is for him to find them. Alternatively, the way that SPV works is you save the information coming in. So when you go out there, you make sure you find where your block is, where your transaction is recorded when you've indexed it, and you hand that information, the part of where it is, to the next person. They don't need to look it up. The magic of a binary tree structure using hashes is you can give them that information, you can give them the block, and they can check it themselves without checking everything. So IPv6, using all of this technology, allows us to build that in. It means that we can actually do these exchanges and send the information required for things such as CGA++. We can send the information required to set up node infrastructures, and we can do that without having a pile of centralized servers. People can set up their own towers and start selling services straight away. So someone in a small corporation in an area, rather than being part of a large telecom company, could actually buy their own infrastructure for their own community. Or a community could do it themselves, and they can start earning money and paying this off themselves. So I don't like the term smart contract because they're not smart and they're not contracts, but you can set up automated arrangements, and those arrangements can partly fund the purchase of, say, the tower. They can purchase the equipment, they can purchase the edge devices. That can be done as a deal with the hardware manufacturer. So a certain percentage goes back. It can simplify taxes. So when you're buying your coffee, in the future we could actually have, rather than having to account for VAT, a certain percentage goes straight to the government and that's it. Then all of that can be automated going back and all the parties can get it straight away. We can build in domain name. So some people have already done this with Paymail and other such things on Bitcoin. That enables the ability to send money directly using email and other such things. So the fear is, what if the person's not there? How do I send them money? Well, I'm old enough and I've been in ISPs long enough to remember UUCP. I remember sending emails and sometimes taking 4 or 5 days for an email to get across. So machines down I'd connect to were in Melbourne IT, and Melbourne IT would only periodically dial in to the American ones and the European ones, not every day. And they would batch download all the emails, and then the next machine would batch download all the emails, and the next machine would batch download all the emails, and eventually you got your email. Not the most efficient process, but it worked. Nothing stops us from doing this right now on systems like Bitcoin as well. If we have slower communications that we don't have something for, We can just build peer-to-peer batched applications because that's the whole nature of a peer-to-peer system. And we can send it to multiple nodes. And people can build new applications on top of IPv6, internet, distributed hash tables, etc., enabling us now to change the nature of how we send and receive information. Some of it could be direct, some of it could be fast, some of it could be like email. Rather than having spam, maybe we want to pay people if they're going to spam us, which was part of the original concept of some of these things. If people want to spam us, fine, pay me to read that mail. Otherwise, I'm not going to. On top of this, we can build in IoT. So my son's, for instance, has just done his dissertation and finished his bachelor degree, now going into UCL to do a master's, but he's just done it on an IoT communication protocol. And this uses Bitcoin. So sending the information as a control device can also work. So using sort of enhanced second layer systems, you know only the true information has been written, only the true sort of command has been done, and you can create access and control tokens that now don't need to run on every system on the internet, don't need to run on every node, only have a selected number. Again, the ability to choose where you propagate on one of these networks is critical, because if you put everything everywhere, the Ethereum model, it won't scale. If you have one world computer running every application and everyone has a copy of that, the slowest computer dictates the computing capacity of the entire network. It's not a good model. So what we need to look at is multi-level controllers. So was asked earlier, what sort of things am I still looking into and researching? And we've got about 1,700, 1,800 patents or something like that in the company now. And we're looking at extending all these ideas, not because of what's happening today, but in a world where we do have IPv6, in a world where we have 6G, in a world where swarm technology will enable vehicles to actually work together to take over and form groups so that, for instance, commercial drivers can save money, save time, have a rest while driving, so that we can have Internet of Things devices send between different areas in the neighborhood, for instance, so that some of the other technologies that we see already for communications, like Hive technology over in Hong Kong, can not be just used for bypassing the Chinese government, but actually have a commercial purpose. So in this architecture, what we're looking at is saving information in part, but then having different levels again. But we control the hierarchies, and like some of the early techniques that I looked at to make Bitcoin, like Mnet or Mojo Nation, we can have distributed networks of machines that both process data and are paid for it, and we can have ones that save data. And rather than having the traditional torrent model, which was more socialism, which everyone's going to be nice and want to do this, we can actually have paid commercial services. And anyone can set up that paid commercial service. That's the difference. Not just because you're a Google or an Amazon, but someone can start doing this in their basement and make a little bit of money and be competitive if they can find a good way of doing it. So by pruning information, we can go right down into edge devices, right down into different levels of storage device, right down into transferring information throughout the network where it needs to be. We can do things like, I want to pay for something like printing. There's a printer here that's in a shop. Oh, perfect. I'm going past, my machine finds it, gets advertised, I print a page, done. I don't know about you, but I've traveled before, and sometimes the hotel doesn't have a printer or something. You need to print something. There you go. Ways of finding information. You can have a distributed system where people can just advertise that they're doing this. And that's really what decentralization's about. It's not about creating a new form of intermediary where everyone has a sort of link into this node and a small group of developers set rules. Decentralization's about the edge. It's about the people in the network, the processes on the edge of the network being able to communicate without having something controlling them in the center. Thank you.
Right now, millions are building the Internet of Value. But the best version of this inevitable future isn't possible unless the data that fuels it can be exchanged securely and with confidence. This is a critical moment in defining our shared future. That's why nChain offers the tools to protect the data we'll need to build that future. The Internet of Value works because we do. Join us in securing the tomorrow we all share. nChain. Data without question.
Bitcoin mining, Bitcoin wallet, blockchain, stablecoins, MetaNet, the evolution of money. Everybody is talking about Bitcoin today. But what exactly is it? Learn the basics from experts. Learn what Bitcoin is, how it works, and why it matters. Bitcoin 101, your ultimate guide to the fundamentals of blockchain.